The first thing I would like to start off with when we're talking about the Article 1 project, you mentioned it's about reclaiming congressional power. So once you reclaim that power, what then would be the relationship between Congress and the regulatory agencies that are currently established right now?
Great question. I'm happy to address this one first if you want to. What would happen at that point is we'd still have the benefit of the expertise that these regulatory agencies bring. They'd still have their enforcement authority. They'd still have their expertise that they could bring to bear on the regulatory process. The difference is that if we were to succeed, then these regulations, once they're proposed, at least any major regulation, one that has legally binding provisions, if it's legally binding on the general public and has a significant economic impact, those regulations would have to be affirmatively enacted into law by Congress. And so we'd still have the benefit of the regulatory agencies, both in their ability to enforce and in their ability to propose a regulatory structure. But the difference is Congress would be affirmatively enacting them into law. And then you could hold individual members of Congress accountable. That's something that we don't have right now. And that, by the way, is something that our modern regulatory system was always supposed to have. This was originally not a Republican idea. This actually was a Democrat idea. When the modern administrative state was created during the New Deal era, James Landis, who was a famous law professor, part of FDR's brain trust, recommended to him at the time that, if we're going to create this kind of system where we're going to be giving de facto lawmaking power to executive branch agencies, in order to make this constitutionally legitimate and to preserve public accountability, these will need to be run through Congress. They'll need to be passed by Congress and signed into law by the president. They never did it. They decided they didn't want to do it. They just overlooked it. For a long time, they did this, and they justified it because they had a different way of having Congress have input. They said Congress would have the ability unilaterally to act to veto any regulation. Over the next few decades, after the regulatory system was developed during the New Deal era, we ended up adopting, we meaning Congress, I wasn't there yet, many hundreds of legislative veto provisions. And Congress loved this because it gave Congress all the power and none of the accountability. The only problem was it was unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court reached that conclusion in 1985 in a case called INS v. Chadha. A lot of people thought that the excessive delegation of lawmaking power would end at that point because Congress would no longer have the last say. But instead, Congress almost seemed to like it, and Congress almost seemed to accelerate the practice of delegating lawmaking power. But that's what we're trying to restore, is that which was always intended at the front end by Professor Landis to be part of the regulatory system.
Do you have anything to add to that, Representative Blair?
Well, I guess one of the things that I would like to add to that, there's an old saying in law that what was meant to be used as a shield shall not be used as a sword. And we want to make sure that regulatory agencies or government altogether is actually working for people. So there are several things. One is, for instance, a group like the CFPB, they're not even funded by Congress. They're not appropriated. They're funded by the Federal Reserve. And so being able to get that back into Congress allows us to be able to hold them accountable, to be able to say, look, if my constituents don't like what they're doing, we at least have the power of the purse back to be able to pull back on some of the issues, some of the bills that they're putting out there, or the rulemaking that they're doing out there. Also, what's happening in Utah with Governor Herbert? He's actually done the Utah Administrative Rulemaking Act, which says that every single rule that is put out there by the administration, by the executive branch, actually has to have a sunset power and has to be reactivated by Congress or by the legislature. Something like that would be really interesting, because then again, we get to go back and look at all of the rulemaking and say, does it actually work? Is it working the way it was intended to work? And again, this is about, instead of somebody in Washington making all of the decisions for us, we're actually putting the American people back into the process again so that they have input with what's going on legislatively.